I found it in the mailbox, sealed tight, light as air. At first, I thought it was nothing. Just a letter. Just a few words. But as I unfolded the paper, the house seemed to still. The air felt colder. There's something your wife hasn't told you. Ask her about the trip last month. I stared at the handwriting, the loops and slants of the letters. A faint stain, a perfect crescent of a coffee cup mark, smudged the corner of the page. I'd seen handwriting like this before. The realization hovered half-formed. I just stood there, keys still in my hand, the letter trembling between my fingers. That's when I realized this wasn't the beginning of something breaking. It was the end of something I hadn't wanted to see. Let me take you back to where it all began. I think that was a Thursday, I think. My wife, Emily, and I had fallen into a routine over the years, comfortable, predictable. She handled the morning rush, packing lunches, filling the kitchen with the smell of toast and fresh coffee. I would leave early for the office, nodding at her as I left with a distracted, "See you tonight." We weren't the couple that needed grand gestures. Our anniversary was a quiet dinner at that Italian place on Main Street. Friday evenings were reserved for takeout and whatever show we could agree on. Emily had a way of making the ordinary feel polished, her hair always smoothed back, makeup subtle but meticulous. I used to joke that she could host a dinner party with 15 minutes notice and make it look easy. Our daughter, Maddie, was in her last year of college, so the house was quieter these days. She called once a week, sometimes twice, her voice bright and distant over the speakerphone while Emily and I sat at the kitchen table. Emily would ask about her classes and her roommates, slipping in motherly reminders about eating properly and locking the apartment door. I would offer practical questions. How's your car holding up? Got enough for rent? Always the same pattern. Nothing felt out of place. That Thursday evening, Emily was in the backyard when I came home. The sun had just begun to dip, bleeding warm light across the fence and patio. She was at the edge of the garden, pruning the roses, wearing the blue sleeveless dress she liked to wear when the weather was warm. I watched her from the kitchen window for a few moments before stepping outside. "Roses look good," I said, my voice low, just enough to catch her attention. She glanced over her shoulder, lips pulling into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks. They needed some care." I stepped closer, noting the faint smudges of soil on her fingers. She smelled faintly of lavender and sunscreen. We stood there for a moment in silence, the evening air thick with the scent of cut grass and the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower. "Long day?" she asked, turning back to her work. "Not bad," I replied. "Closed the Anderson account. Might even get out of the office early next week." She nodded absently, snipping another stem. "That's good." I watched her for a moment longer, the way her shoulders tensed ever so slightly. It wasn't a detail most would notice, but after 23 years of marriage, I knew her rhythms like the back of my hand. There was a tightness in her gestures, an edge of distraction. "Something on your mind?" I asked, casually. Emily paused, then shook her head. "Just tired. Long day." I accepted her answer without pressing. I'd learned that silence often revealed more than questions. Later, we ate dinner in front of the TV, half watching a show we'd seen before. She laughed at the same jokes, but her gaze flicked toward her phone more often than usual, her smile fading between notifications. That night, lying in bed, I listened to her breathing beside me, slow and steady, and stared at the ceiling. The shadows stretched long and thin, cast by the streetlight outside. I thought about the way she had smiled earlier, the flicker of hesitation in her voice. My own breathing felt shallow, a weight pressing against my chest. But I told myself it was nothing, work stress, routine fatigue. We were fine. We were solid. Until I found the letter in the mailbox. The next morning, I rose early, made the coffee, and left the house without waking her. But as I drove to work, my thoughts kept circling back to that faint coffee stain, the shape of the handwriting. I'd seen it before, in the margins of meeting notes, scribbled phone numbers, casual reminders jotted down on sticky notes. I just couldn't place it yet. It wasn't just the letter that unsettled me. It was everything that followed, or maybe it was everything that had already begun. Subtle shifts I hadn't wanted to name. The next evening, I came home earlier than usual. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the dishwasher. Emily wasn't in the kitchen, wasn't in the living room. I called her name, a soft, habitual "Em." Her voice floated down from upstairs. "I'm here." I found her sitting on the edge of our bed, hair still damp from a shower. She wore a loose t-shirt and leggings, scrolling through her phone. A glass of wine sat untouched on the nightstand. I leaned against the doorframe. "You okay?" She glanced up, smile a shade too quick. "Yeah." Just tired. Long day. I stepped closer, noticing a faint crease between her brows, the kind she used to get when she was deep in thought. Want to order something? I could pick up the Thai place you like. No, I'm not really hungry. That was new. Emily always had an appetite for takeout, especially from that place. I didn't push it. Instead, I sat beside her, close enough that our knees touched. Work's been a lot? She exhaled, eyes dropping back to her phone. You know how it is. Deadlines. Meetings. Stress. Anything I can help with? She hesitated just long enough for me to notice. No, it's fine. Just need to get through this week. I nodded, offering a half smile. We'll get through it. Her lips twitched upward, but her gaze didn't quite meet mine. Over the next few days, the pattern repeated. She came home later, citing back-to-back meetings and unexpected project deadlines. When we did sit down for dinner, she was distracted, checking her phone between bites, her laughter a touch too forced. One evening, I found her standing by the front window, phone pressed to her ear, murmuring low enough that I couldn't catch the words. She ended the call as soon as I stepped into the room. Everything okay? I asked. She turned, smile practiced. Just work stuff. They're changing some timelines on a project. Her explanations were always plausible. Always just enough. That weekend, I suggested we go for a walk, like we used to. Let's get out of the house, clear our heads. She hesitated. I've got a few things to finish up. Maybe later. I waited, standing there, keys in hand, feeling the invisible distance stretching between us. You sure? I asked, voice light, almost teasing. I'm sure, she said, already turning back toward her laptop. I left alone. There were moments when I caught myself trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was just work stress. Maybe she was hormonal. Maybe this was just what happens after years of marriage, a natural ebb and flow, a season of distance. One night, as we lay in bed, the glow of her phone lit her face. I turned onto my side, watching her from the corner of my eye. Can you put the phone down? I asked quietly. She startled slightly, then set it on the nightstand. Sorry, just reading something. I nodded, but the tightness in my chest stayed. You've been different lately. Everything okay? Her hand reached for mine under the covers. I'm just tired, John. You know how work's been. I know. I still love you, she added softly, a tremor in her voice. I squeezed her hand gently. I love you too. But I lay awake long after her breathing slowed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. The next morning, while making coffee, I caught her glancing at her phone, a faint smile on her lips, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in a long time soft. She caught me watching and immediately tucked the phone into her bag. Who was that? I asked, casual, pouring my coffee. She shrugged. Just Maddie. She's asking about flights for Thanksgiving. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. Maddie was always last minute about travel plans, but this felt rehearsed. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was reading too much into things. But the quiet dissonance between us lingered like a wrong note in a familiar song. That afternoon, as I sat in my office, the letter resurfaced in my mind. I pulled it from the stack of junk mail in my briefcase and studied the handwriting again, tracing the loops and slants with my eyes. I could almost see the hand that wrote it, the faint familiarity that had nagged at me from the beginning. But I still couldn't quite place it. Not yet. For a while, I told myself I was imagining things. That the changes in Emily's behavior were just the natural byproduct of stress or age. But the feeling didn't pass. It only grew heavier, like a quiet pressure behind my ribs. It started with the little things. One night, I came home earlier than usual and found Emily already in the kitchen. She was wearing a simple blouse and jeans, standing by the counter scrolling on her phone. The way her fingers tapped the screen was quick, practiced. Hey, I said, setting my briefcase down. She looked up, startled, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Hi, you're home early. Yeah, finished up some things faster than I thought. What's for dinner? She hesitated. Oh, I was just thinking of ordering in. Sure, I said, watching her. Long day? She nodded. Back-to-back meetings. I didn't even get a chance to breathe. Her voice was smooth, easy, but her eyes darted back to her phone as she spoke. A few minutes later, she disappeared into the bathroom with it, the sound of the lock clicking behind her. That was new. Another evening, I suggested we watch a movie together, like we used to. Emily smiled, almost apologetically. I can't tonight. I've got to finish some reports for tomorrow. I stayed downstairs and half-watched a baseball game while she disappeared into the study. An hour later, I noticed the soft glow of her phone light under the crack of the door. The sound of her voice, low, intimate, filtered faintly through. I sat there, letting the quiet hum of the TV cover the tension that was beginning to coil inside me. Saturday, she said she had a planning session with a committee for a local fundraiser. I offered to drop her off, but she insisted on driving herself. I watched from the window as she backed out of the driveway, her expression calm, almost rehearsed. Out of curiosity, or maybe something closer to dread, I texted Rachel, a mutual friend who chaired the committee. "Hey, is Emily still planning to help with the fundraiser?" Rachel replied within minutes. "She actually stepped back this year. Said work's been too busy." "Why do you ask?" I stared at the message for a long moment. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't reply. That night, when Emily came home, her hair was slightly tousled, her cheeks flushed in a way that didn't match the narrative of an exhausting planning session. She kissed my cheek lightly and said, "It went well. Lots to sort out, but we're on track." I nodded, saying nothing. The next week, I began paying closer attention to her habits. She started keeping her phone on silent, even at home. The screen always faced down on the table. At night, after I fell into what she probably thought was sleep, I heard the faint clicks of her typing, rapid messages fired off under the covers, screen light illuminating her face. "Couldn't sleep," she would mumble if I stirred. I stopped asking. One Thursday evening, I left the office earlier than usual and drove past the local wine bar Emily and I used to visit. Her car was parked out front, though she'd told me she was working late. I sat there for a while, engine idling, watching the windows glow with soft golden light. Eventually she emerged, her laughter bright and unfamiliar, trailing behind a man I recognized from the neighborhood. He wasn't a stranger. They spoke quietly and closely, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She turned, glanced briefly toward the street, and I ducked down instinctively. My pulse hammered in my ears. That night, she came home later than usual, her explanation a murmur of meetings that ran long. "Everything okay at work?" I asked, voice neutral. "Yeah," she said, her smile thin. "Just a lot to handle." I nodded, watching her retreat upstairs, the same flicker of guilt or calculation, or both, in her eyes. The next morning, I found the faint scent of a different cologne on her coat. Not hers. I said nothing, but as I stood by the window, watching her pull out of the driveway, a knot settled in my chest. This wasn't a story I could rewrite with explanations of stress or distraction. Something was shifting, and I was finally seeing the shape of it. And for the first time, I knew it was real. The letter had stayed in my drawer for days, almost forgotten beneath bills and reminders. But after Emily's late nights and strange explanations piled up, I found myself pulling it out again. The handwriting was neat, too neat, the kind that looked rehearsed. It read simply, "There's something your wife hasn't told you. Ask her about the trip last month. Signed, a friend." The words were still sharp, but what caught my eye now was the faint coffee ring in the upper corner. The mark was pale, imperfect, a subtle crescent where the paper had absorbed the bottom of a cup. It wasn't just familiar. It was Michael's. Michael had been a close friend for years, the kind of friend who left you little notes about weekend plans, who scrawled reminders about golf games on scraps of paper, always accompanied by a half-empty coffee mug. The same looping letters. The same accidental coffee rings. Michael, who'd been a fixture at our dinner table, who always had a story ready, a laugh shared. My stomach turned. That weekend, Emily left for an overnight client meeting. The excuse was smooth, rehearsed. "It's just for one night. They need me to go over the proposal before Monday." I asked which hotel. "Downtown Marriott," she said without hesitation. After she left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the letter and thinking of the wine stain, of Michael's lazy loops. I pulled out an old note he'd left me once with fishing cabin directions, the memory of his handwriting vivid. The comparison was undeniable, the slant, the shape of the letters, even the faint echo of coffee smudging the edges. It was him. I didn't shout, didn't confront her. Instead, I waited. I checked her text history when she forgot to take her phone to the bathroom, scanning for anything obvious. Most messages were innocuous, casual. But one name kept appearing: Michael. The texts were careful, guarded. Short notes about meeting up, a mention of next time, when she was free, a cryptic message: "Thursday's still good. I'll wait in the usual spot." Thursday. That was the day she said she had to stay late at work. I checked her calendar. Thursday was marked with a block for a team meeting, but her location history showed a coffee shop near Michael's office. The pattern emerged, quiet but certain. Little things, the wine glasses I found in the dishwasher after she said she'd skip dinner, the faint scent of cologne I didn't recognize lingering on her scarf, the shift in her laugh when Michael's name was mentioned at a neighborhood barbecue. I sat in the silence of our house, watching the afternoon light fade, feeling the weight of it all settle. My friend left me a trail to follow, breadcrumbs I hadn't noticed until now. Why? Guilt? Some twisted confession? Or had he wanted me to find out all along? I didn't have the answers. Only the certainty. That's when I knew. And it changed everything. Emily came home later than usual that evening, her keys jingling as she stepped into the front hall. She hung her coat with the same practiced ease, placed her bag carefully on the side table. I was waiting for her in the living room, the envelope with the letter and Michael's old note sitting on the coffee table in front of me. She froze when she saw me, her posture tightening, the easy smile fading from her lips. "You're home early," she said, voice cautious. I said nothing, just nodded toward the envelope. Her gaze flicked to it, then back to me. "What's that?" I didn't answer. I stood, walking slowly to the window, watching the early evening light stretch long shadows across the lawn. Behind me, I heard the faint rustle as she crossed the room, hesitated, then finally sat. "You've been lying to me," I said quietly, still not turning to face her. She exhaled sharply, a sound caught between frustration and fear. "Jonathan, I turned then, met her gaze directly. "Don't," I said, my voice low, controlled. "Don't tell me it's nothing. Don't tell me I'm imagining things." She pressed her lips together, eyes flickering to the envelope again. "What do you think you know?" I picked it up, flipped the letter out, held it up between two fingers. "I know this letter didn't come from a stranger. I know it came from Michael. And I know you've been meeting him." Her face paled, her breath caught. "Michael?" "Don't act surprised," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "His handwriting, his coffee stain, his pattern of casual betrayal etched in every careless detail." Emily's shoulders sagged, her hands trembling slightly as they fumbled in her lap. "I never meant for it to get this far," she said, voice cracking. It was a mistake." I stepped closer, leaning just enough to keep my voice low but firm. "A mistake you repeated, covered up, and then lied about. Was it a mistake when you stayed late at the wine bar? When you texted him to meet you at the coffee shop? When you told me you were planning a fundraiser while meeting him instead?" Tears welled in her eyes, her mouth trembling as she tried to speak. "I was lonely, Jonathan. You've been distant. Always working. I didn't plan for this." "You didn't plan to get caught," I interrupted, the words sharper now, laced with the bitterness I'd been holding back. "You planned to keep going, to play both sides, to come home and kiss me while texting him." She shook her head, her voice rising. "No, it wasn't like that. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I just stopped." I dropped the letter back onto the table, the paper fluttering down like a leaf. "Stop what? The meetings? The lies? Or stop when you realized you'd left a trail too obvious to ignore?" For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock, the sound of her quiet, broken breathing. I stood there, watching her crumble, waiting for some explanation that could make sense of the wreckage. But none came. "Michael?" I asked, my voice quieter, but colder. "Did you love him?" She looked away, her lips trembling. "I don't know." The admission was like a slap, sharp and undeniable. The trust we'd built, the years we'd weathered, the quiet routines we'd shared, they all shattered under the weight of that uncertainty. I stepped back, the distance between us now more than just physical. "I trusted you," I said, my voice hollow. "I know," she whispered, the tears spilling over now. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I stared at her, feeling a cold emptiness settle in my chest. There was no anger, no rage. Just a quiet, crushing realization that nothing she said could piece together what had been broken. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I said, turning away. The silence between us deepened, stretching into something heavy, unbearable. The ticking clock marked each second like a gavel, punctuating the collapse of everything we'd once shared. I left the room, the letter still lying on the coffee table, her quiet sobs echoing behind me as I climbed the stairs. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while the house settled into an uneasy silence. Her breathing from the guest room, faint and uneven, punctuated the space between. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just lay there, hollowed out, listening to the sound of everything breaking. And in that moment, I knew there was no going back. The morning after was quiet, suffocatingly so. The house felt larger, emptier. I woke to the pale gray light creeping around the edges of the curtains, casting thin lines across the bedroom floor. Emily's side of the bed was empty. I could hear her movements downstairs, the clink of a coffee mug, the soft pat of her slippers on the hardwood. I stayed where I was, staring at the ceiling, my hands resting flat against the sheets. I wasn't ready to face her. Not yet. When I finally made it downstairs, she was seated at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug. The coffee had long gone cold. She didn't look up as I entered. I opened the fridge, stared blankly inside, and closed it again. The weight of unspoken words thickened the air between us. "I'll be in the study," I said quietly, my voice low and unfamiliar in my own ears. She nodded, her lips pressed together, her shoulders hunched inward. I left her there and closed the door behind me, shutting out the faint sounds of her trying to hold herself together. The days that followed passed like a dull ache. I drifted through them in a haze of routine, waking, dressing, leaving for work without a word. Coming home, entering a house that felt less like a home and more like a stage where the script had long since been abandoned. I avoided her as best I could. Meals were eaten in separate rooms. Conversations were clipped, transactional. "Did you pay the gas bill?" Maddie called. "She's flying in next weekend. I'll take the car for the oil change." Words that filled the space but meant nothing. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while the darkness pressed down like a weight. I could hear her breathing in the guest room, quiet, strained. The house felt cavernous, the silence louder than any argument we might have had. I found myself pacing the halls at odd hours, the soft creak of the floorboards under my feet the only sound. I stood at the window in the living room, watching the streetlights cast long, thin shadows across the driveway. I sat in the armchair, the television off, staring at the reflection of my own stillness in the darkened screen. One evening, I found myself lingering in the doorway of what used to be our shared bedroom. The bed was neatly made, her absence a visible indentation against the crispness of the sheets. Her perfume still hung faintly in the air, mingling with the scent of fabric softener and the quiet chill of the room. I sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on my knees, hands loosely clasped. My mind churned with fragments, her smile over dinner, the absent-minded way she'd touch my arm, the night she said she was working late but came home smelling faintly of someone else's cologne. I couldn't make sense of it. Couldn't reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the one who had betrayed me. I kept searching for a missing piece, a moment where I might have changed the course, a word I might have said differently. But the answers eluded me, slipping through my grasp like sand. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed steadily, an indifferent witness to the fracture that had split our lives. I noticed little things, the faint smudge of her fingerprint on the coffee pot, a forgotten grocery list with her handwriting curling across it, the pink mug she always used pushed to the back of the cabinet as if she couldn't bear to see it. The silence became a character in itself, stretching between us, thick and impenetrable. I moved through it like a ghost, my steps measured, my thoughts a quiet cacophony of disbelief and resignation. I wasn't ready to make a decision yet. I wasn't ready to speak. I needed time, space, the slow unfolding of thought. So, I retreated. Into the study, into the corners of the house where her presence felt less suffocating. I let the silence press in, let it carve out the boundaries of this new, unfamiliar world. The house settled around me, its walls absorbing the quiet, its windows reflecting my stillness back at me. And in that emptiness, I sat, waiting for the noise to return. Sunday afternoon settled heavy over the house, the kind of stillness that made every sound sharper, more intrusive. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the cold mug of coffee in front of me, lost in a silence thick with unspoken questions. The phone vibrated once, then again, its screen lighting up with a name I hadn't seen since I pieced everything together. Michael. I let it ring twice, my thumb hovering over the decline button, before I finally pressed accept. The line buzzed faintly, then his voice came through, quiet and strained. "Hey, John. Can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. The sound of his breathing filled the silence between us, tentative and fragile. Finally, I said, "Go ahead." "I never meant for it to happen," he said, voice cracking around the edges. "It started out. I don't know. Small. Just conversations. You were my friend. I was in a bad place. She said she was too. We didn't plan for it to go this far." I closed my eyes, the weight of his words pressing against my temples. "Don't justify it," I said quietly. "I'm not," he whispered. I needed you to hear it from me. I didn't think you deserved to find out the way you did." A bitter laugh escaped me, low and sharp. "You thought leaving a note with a coffee stain was better?" He sighed, the sound hollow. "I thought it would stop. I thought if she knew you might know, we'd stop. We'd come to our senses. But it didn't." I let the silence answer for me, the quiet between a stretching fin. His voice faltered on the other end, and then he hung up. That evening, I found myself in the living room, a glass of whiskey untouched in my hand. I stared at the muted reflection of myself in the darkened window, watching the faint outline of my figure, still and unfamiliar. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the floorboards upstairs where Emily moved quietly, all sounded louder against the backdrop of my thoughts. I thought about every moment I'd brushed aside. The nights she worked late, the smiles she offered with a layer of distance, the quiet way Michael inserted himself into our life, the casual offers to help with repairs, the laughter that stretched a beat too long at the dinner table, the shared glances I dismissed as friendly familiarity. I thought about myself too, my own silence, the way I'd let routine become a substitute for intimacy, how I'd allowed work, distractions, the comfort of predictability to dull the edges of our connection. It didn't excuse what they did, but it painted the outlines of a landscape where betrayal found fertile ground. Later, Emily came downstairs, her face pale, her eyes rimmed with red. She stood uncertainly in the doorway for a moment before sinking into the chair across from me, her hands twisting in her lap. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, her voice thin as paper. I met her eyes, my own voice quiet but unyielding. "I know. But it did." She looked down, her shoulders folding inward. I felt invisible, like we were roommates. "I didn't think you saw me anymore." The words scraped across my chest, sharp and raw. "And so you let him make you feel seen?" Her silence was answer enough. I stared at the glass in my hand, watching the light catch the amber liquid. "I can't pretend this didn't happen," I said finally. "I can't unsee it." "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, John." I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I thought I knew. The woman who, somewhere along the way, had become a stranger wearing her face. I saw her regret, her shame. But I also saw the choices she had made, the deliberate steps that had led us here. "What now?" she asked softly, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the hum of the house. I shook my head, my jaw tightening. "I don't know. But I do know this. What we were, that's gone. And now, I have to decide whether I'm willing to rebuild something from the ashes." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. I let the silence settle, heavy and impenetrable. The truth was a hard, unyielding thing. It had happened. The betrayal was real. And now, I had to choose whether to stay and live with the echo of it or walk away and leave the pieces where they lay. I sat in the kitchen early the next morning, the house still dark, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. My hands were wrapped around a mug of cold coffee, my mind circling the same dead-end thoughts. Emily stood in the doorway, wearing her robe, her face pale and drawn. For a long time, she didn't say a word. Neither did I. Finally, she spoke. "Are you going to leave?" The question hung in the air, weightless and heavy all at once. I didn't answer right away. I let it settle, let it find its place between us. I stared at the surface of my coffee, tracing the reflection of the ceiling light in the dark liquid. "I'm not sure what I'm doing," I said quietly. She stepped into the room, her hands trembling slightly. "I'll do whatever you want, John. I'll leave if you want me to." I shook my head slowly. "It's not about what I want. It's about what I can live with." The words felt heavy in my mouth, real in a way nothing else had been. I stood, pushing the mug aside, and leaned against the counter, staring at the tiled floor. "I can't forget what you did," I said, my voice flat, almost detached. "I can't unsee it, unhear it, pretend it didn't happen." She pressed her lips together, her breath shuddering. "I understand. But I don't want to end things today," I continued, the words tasting strange, unfamiliar. "Not because I forgive you. Not because I'm trying to save us. But because I need space. I need time. I need to think." She nodded, her shoulders slumping with the weight of everything unspoken. "I can give you that," she said softly. I looked at her then, really looked at her, the woman I'd built a life with, shared laughter and quiet mornings, arguments over nothing and holidays filled with family. The woman who'd chosen something, someone else, over us. "I'll stay in the guest room for now," I said. "I'll pack some things later. I'll need space." Her eyes welled with tears, but she didn't speak. I didn't wait for her to argue or plead. I turned and walked past her, my steps measured, my body numb. I climbed the stairs, the faint creak of each step loud in the silence of the house. In the bedroom, I packed a small bag, clothes, toiletries, nothing more. I stood there, looking at the life we'd shared reduced to a few essentials. The bed, still made from the day before, looked like a relic from another time. I closed the door behind me and walked down to the guest room. The bed was unmade, the sheets rumpled from the nights I'd spent there in silence. I set the bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, listening to the muted sounds of her moving around downstairs. There was no dramatic confrontation, no pleading for forgiveness, no grand gesture of reconciliation. Just the quiet understanding that something fundamental had broken between us. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe we'd try counseling. Maybe we'd drift into separate lives. Maybe I'd wake up one morning and know I couldn't stay. But in that moment, sitting alone in the guest room, the weight of the decision settled over me. It wasn't a decision made from rage or impulse. It was something quieter, something final. I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. But I couldn't stay, not really. I closed my eyes, the sounds of the house around me fading into silence. That's when I realized we weren't partners anymore. We were just two people, trying to survive in the ruins of what we used to be. The weeks after I moved into the guest room passed in a blur of quiet avoidance and mechanical routines. Emily and I coexisted like strangers sharing a space. Meals were eaten in silence. The sound of her voice became something distant, something hollow. One evening, I told her I was filing for divorce. The words felt strange in my mouth but landed with a dull, irrevocable weight. She didn't argue, just nodded, her eyes glassy but dry. I had expected tears or protests, but in the end, all we shared was resignation. Packing my things was easier than I imagined. I took only what I needed, leaving behind reminders of our life together, framed photos, keepsakes from vacations, the dishes we'd picked out when we first moved in. I found an apartment across town, small and unassuming. The silence there was a different kind, one I chose, not one imposed. Friends reached out. Michael did not. Emily tried, once or twice, calling late at night, leaving voicemails I didn't answer. "I'm sorry," she'd say. "I just need to hear your voice." I deleted them without listening. I started therapy, not because I hoped to fix what had been broken, but because I needed to understand how I'd let it happen, how I'd become a man blind to the cracks forming beneath his own feet. My therapist said healing wasn't about assigning blame, but about rebuilding something stronger from the pieces. Maddie called one evening, her voice tentative. "Dad, are you okay?" I hesitated before answering. "I'm getting there," I said. She visited a few weeks later, bringing a small houseplant for my windowsill. We sat together in the quiet, sipping tea, talking about anything but the past. The silence between us wasn't heavy, but companionable, an acknowledgement of things too large for words. Emily's texts dwindled until they stopped altogether. I heard from mutual friends that she moved out of the house, downsized into a smaller place. We didn't cross paths, didn't exchange final words or glances. The clean break I had once thought impossible became the quiet reality of my days. I never imagined I would be here, alone in a quiet apartment, starting over at 54. I thought I'd feel bitter, angry, consumed by what I'd lost. But what surprised me was the absence of those emotions. What remained was something quieter, steadier. I learned to cook for one, to fold laundry without resentment, to find peace in the sound of my own breathing. I reconnected with old friends, rediscovered small joys, morning walks, books I'd meant to read, the taste of good coffee without the bitterness of regret. There were nights when the silence felt sharp, a reminder of what had been torn away. But even in those moments, I found strength not in forgetting, but in accepting, in understanding that some stories end not with explosions, but with a slow, measured letting go. I wasn't fixed. I wasn't whole. But I was no longer waiting for the pieces to fall back into place. I stopped waiting for her. And for the first time, the silence felt earned.